Hello, thank you for joining us today. The GCLS Virtual Series is welcoming you to the presentation From Pain to Published, Turning Heartache into Memoir. Let's get started. We hope you enjoy this event.
So welcome to this presentation about writing memoir From Pain to Published. My name is Felice, and I am the author of a couple of memoirs. We'll get into that, but let's begin. So why are you here? Why are you here? So maybe you're passionate about turning your personal story of heartache or loss or trauma into memoir. You want to get over pain in a constructive way. And perhaps you're looking for the motivation or the steps to begin. And we're going to go through all of these things today. And so what will you learn from this presentation? You're going to learn how to begin, which with anything you do is really the hardest part, figuring out the story you want to tell and how to flesh it out and how to get it out of your head and onto the page with thought-provoking prompts that are going to inspire you. And we want to stay on track and keep you motivated, because with any goal, it's staying motivated till the end is important. So we're going to help you create those steps to get you from point A to point B. What else you'll learn? You're going to learn about how to get past the fear of writing about something painful. It's not easy. Emotions come up and sometimes you get stuck. So we're going to work on how to get through that. And how can you work through the pain that comes from writing so you can take control of your own story and no longer be a victim of it? So why am I qualified to teach this? Well, I'm the author of 3 memoirs. The first one is half in a coming-of-age memoir, Forbidden Love. When I was 23, I had a secret affair with my boss, a woman who was 57 and had a long-term partner. And I kept this story a secret it wasn't a story yet, but I kept it a secret for almost 3 decades. I was ashamed because I was in love with someone who was so much older. And now the closer I get to 57, I realize that that's not that old. But when I was 23, it sure felt like it. Plus, I was coming out at a time when it was don't ask, don't tell. And of course, today it's love is love. The other book I wrote was What Papa Told Me, about my grandfather, who was a Holocaust survivor. And writing his story was about the ultimate pain and how we got through that. And I was happy to share that story. I had never written a story like this before. And it was in telling his story, I realized the power that can come from telling your truth. For 60 years, he kept these stories inside, and the release of that for him was very powerful. And I lived in 90 square feet, and I wrote a book about living in one of the world's smallest apartments. And it's about how living tiny made my life larger. And it's also about organizing, because I'm a professional organizer. And I mention the organizing because in writing a memoir and writing any book, a big part of that is organizing, because, it's daunting to think of writing a whole book, but we've got to break it down. And just like putting together shelves from IKEA, you've got these steps. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to organize the steps to get you started, to keep you going, and to get you to finish your memoir. And I should say that while this is great for memoir, you can always use your story to write fiction. You can maybe turn it into fiction, but it's getting that story out so that you can get through it. I'm a motivational speaker. I speak around the country. I speak at tiny house festivals. I'm a Holocaust educator. And it's about getting you started and how to stay motivated and finding the little tricks to do it. And I also love cycling and stand-up paddleboarding. And I mentioned jigsaw puzzles because for me, writing a book is like putting together a jigsaw puzzle, right? It's all these pieces, all these scenes, all these stories, and how to put them together in one story. So what is memoir? Well, memoir tells a compelling story from your life experience. Maybe it's a battle with a disease, surviving a trauma, and it's around a particular theme. Maybe it's addiction or love or shame that builds a connection with your readers. And we're trying to make sense of your story so that readers can relate. And unlike an autobiography, a memoir is not your entire life. It's if your life were a pie and the memoir is one little slice of that pie. And it could mention stories from your childhood and other parts of your life, but really it's this one theme. And two big parts of memoir are reflection and takeaway. You survived this. How did you do it? How do you feel now? And we're going to go into all these things, and I'm going to show you exercises to how to find out the answers to these things. So why write a memoir? You have something worth sharing that can change the lives of others through what happened to you. Perhaps it's important for you to tell the truth about your life. For me, I had to write this down. When this older woman died 10 years after we started this affair, I mourned her as I had loved her in secret. And for me as a writer, I just had to write. But it wasn't enough for me just to write it down. I had to publish it. I needed to share my story. I needed to get it out there because in all these subsequent relationships, I was finding myself doing the same things, the same habits. I couldn't trust. I was afraid to go all the way in. I was only half in, which is why I named the book Half In. And I felt like, why couldn't I go all in? And for me, it was because I was holding on to the secret. There was something in my life I couldn't get past because I was holding on to the secret. And you want to also ask yourself, why do I want to write a memoir? The why is probably the most important reason. Why are you here? Why did you come to this workshop? Why do you want to write this? And when I speak at tiny house festivals around the country, I ask, why do you want to live tiny? And the answer has to be your own. You have to have your own why, because there are going to be times in the middle of this process, whether you're living tiny or whether you're getting frustrated from writing or feeling down or feeling overwhelmed, when you have to remind yourself of your why. Why am I doing this? And I always say, write it down and put it on your refrigerator. And it might change, and that's okay. But why are you doing this? And that's what you always want to remind yourself. I was doing this so that I could actually fall in love again and feel that again, because something was keeping me from doing that. And that was my why. And it was pretty consistent the whole time. Every time I felt like I can't finish this or I can't do this, that stayed with me. So what are the benefits of life writing for healing? Well, publicly owning your vulnerabilities or the emotions that traumatize you, you're able to step out of your grief or your shame. And it can be the difference between speaking out and being silenced all over again. I had so much shame from this. And people now say, how do you have shame from being in love? Love is love. And yes, that's true. Again, this was the early 90s. I wasn't out. I wasn't sure what was going on with my life. These were new things. She had a partner. This was a secret affair. And again, I felt like something was wrong with me for loving someone so much older. And I know today we look at that and think, there's so many different ways to love someone. And this helped me get over that shame. And another reason is to learn how to deal with external evaluation, writing despite rejection. Memoir is slippery. There are going to be people that don't like your story, that don't like your writing style, but you have to remember that you're writing this for yourself. And, you can take rejection, take criticism, what turns, a victim into a survivor. And another big thing, it helps track those spinning thoughts and feelings in your mind. Have you ever been up late at night? You can't sleep because there are things that are bothering you and they're spinning in your head. And I always say to write them down, because when we can take them out of our heads, sometimes they don't seem as big or overwhelming when they're written down on paper. And we also want to learn to take ownership of our life and shape it the way we want. We're writing it down. We can change the narrative. We can change the ending. Part of this, yes, is to write memoir. Maybe it's just to write it down, or maybe it's just to learn how to deal with that pain. It's not necessarily for publication. One of the most incredible things that has happened to me since my book has come out is this community of writers now. People who've read my memoir, people who are also writers, that are also memoirists, that have read the story, that have understood what I've gone through. I have strangers emailing me, even straight men who've read the story and felt, solidarity with that. They've thought, I've gone through something like that. But other writers know the daunting aspect of putting out, especially a memoir, something so personal, and the fear of that. And having this group, these friends to rely on, it helps me. It reduces my anxiety, depression. It makes me feel better about what I've done. And again, when you put out your truth, you can observe your thoughts and feelings. You've gotten it out. You've kind of released it. And sometimes, our biggest fears are not that big once we've let them go. They say you're only as sick as your secrets. And being able to get rid of that, to take that off, is such an incredible feeling. And it's facing your biggest vulnerabilities. I was so scared. And I remember during the pandemic finishing this book and talking with my parents. I went and moved back home and stayed with them and helped them. And I finally thought life felt so fragile, and being able to share this with them, and they were so supportive. I thought, if they're okay with it, I'm not afraid of anyone else. So what are the basics of writing memoir? Now, I broke this workshop into two parts: the basics for writing a memoir, and then how to really flesh it out. So we're going to go through the basics. Really, it's kind of writing down the bones and getting you ready. So these exercises are really going to help you start. And they're going to give you kind of the outline of this book, and then we're going to flesh it out with color. So self-reflection. I want you to think of the most important events that shape your life, whether they hurt you or made you sad or happy or fearful. They're just a word or two. You can write these freehand. You can type them up as bullets, whatever you want, get them down. And they should just be a word or two. And this can go on for a while. You might wake up in the middle of the night and think of something else. And this is starting to create the chapters of your book. So little by little, we're creating this. And they might change. You might add more. You might split them up. Some might not be relevant at all. But this is the time where you just kind of close your eyes and write. Think of anything that happened. And as you start working on them, we're going to get into that. It might trigger other memories. And that's okay. We're going to keep going and going. So this is the first step. It's really going to help reflect every other step in this process. So after you've begun, you've got this list. We want to narrow our focus. We're looking for that one big idea or theme to help guide our writing. So you look through the self-reflection list, and is there a common theme or topic? And if you can name it in one declarative statement, I want to write about this. For my book, Half In, I said I wanted to write about this age gap lesbian love affair. But the book is also about figuring out your sexuality and figuring out where you belong in the real world. But as I went through and I started by writing down all my journal entries and all our letters and kind of finding the theme there. But it took a long time to kind of find this theme. And again, the theme can change. It's something to get you started. What's the idea? Why did you join this workshop? I want to write about this. Write that, put it up on your fridge with your why. And again, that can change. Nothing's carved in stone, but it gets us beginning. It gets us started, because the hardest part is always starting. So we look through our list. We want to find a connection or a theme, and we want to organize it. It's my favorite word, organizing, as an organizer. But what we want to do you want to tell your story chronologically? I've done so many times, I've put all my different ideas on Post-it notes and stuck them up on the wall or the floor or the table. And you try to figure out the theme you want to tell. Again, maybe you want to go back and forth in time. Maybe you want to go chronologically. Maybe you're still figuring it out, but give yourself an idea, because we want to create a map. Like we all know Google Maps, it gives us every step. And that's what we want to do. And if we change direction halfway, that's okay. Our map will start connecting it in a different way. Maybe we move it around. You want to find that, make sure that every scene relates to your theme as well. So you might read through each bullet and say, hey, does this go to my theme? Maybe it does. Great. If it doesn't, maybe you say bye-bye, or maybe you kind of hold it. Maybe something else will come up. Maybe there's a reason you wrote that down. You might find another tie-in. So again, you might come up with other ideas. It's kind of a constantly evolving process. You want to pick a type of memoir. Again, nothing's carved in stone. This could change. Maybe it's an anthology of life stories, it's personal essays, it's a confessional memoir. For me, I wrote my memoir as though it were a novel. The book reads like a novel because for me, I wanted to read that kind of book. And you can do, it's creative. You can do whatever you want to do. And again, it can be changed, but you want a way to help you get started. So with my book, it starts in the future at the moment right before Sarah dies. That's the prologue, and it's short. And then it goes right from there to 10 years earlier, right when I walk in for my interview with Sarah to work for her. And I piss her off right away. She gets mad at me. But so that's where the story begins. And that took me a lot of iterations to get there. But I love stories that kind of go back in time, and you can do whatever story you want. And again, have an idea when you start, and then you can always change. So reflection and takeaway, and we get more into this later, but it's so important that I want to mention it now. So again, it's the most critical part because memoir is about an experience you went through and how you survived it. What happened to you? Did you get stronger from it? You want to show how these experiences affected you and how you grew and changed, because that's why people like to read memoir. They read things that might never happen to them, that they'll never go through. Somebody survives, atrocities in Zimbabwe. Why are we reading that memoir? Because we're interested in someone else's life story. It might never happen to us. You might hopefully will never be in the Holocaust. Why do you want to read that story? And as we go through later on how to flesh out our list, you're going to read it back through as the you now. You no longer as that person that it went through, and you want to write down how you feel now. Do you still have those same fears and anxieties? Did it change how you thought of the experience? Are you able to kind of look at it with some distance? Do you think you're wiser? Are you still mad at that person? How do you feel now? We want to get at how it affected your life, and we're going to go through exercises on how to exactly do that. We want to tell the truth, obviously. We don't want to end up on Oprah's couch saying, okay, I lied through this whole thing. Memoir is about recreating what happened, but by honoring that emotional truth. You want to be honest and genuine, and you don't want to exaggerate. If you can't remember something, lean into what possibly happened. In my book, I have a scene with my mom. Do I remember exactly what she was wearing? No, but she grew up in Brooklyn. Even though she lived on Cape Cod, the home of pink and green, she still loved wearing black. So I put her in black pants and a black sweater, something like that, and it's, it wasn't that I had no, root canal without Novocaine, but it's something like that. You want to give your story color without, exaggerating. And I'm going to go through, later how to give it that color. You want to research for accuracy. Thank God we have this thing today called Google. We want to create fuller stories. We want to give detail because, it helps our story, gives it credibility. And you're not going to be 100% certain about things that happened. Can you ask family or friends what was going on at that time? We all have a different memory of the same event and things that are going on. Now, in 1993, while this affair had begun, there was another affair that was going on at the same time. And you might have heard about this with Monica Lewinsky and President Clinton. That was a big deal. That was a secret affair. And here I was having my own secret affair, not at that level, but in our own bubble at UMass. We were in a big pond. And if people found out, that would have been very scary. So here that was going on at the same time. So how can I reflect on that in my story? There were other things going on. It was the O.J. Simpson trial. So these things can help, give a little more depth to your story. You want to determine the setting of your story. Did it take place in the country, in the city? You want to ship? These details will help give some depth to your story. When I was writing in 1993, I had moved home after college. I had no idea. I was lost. I didn't have a job. I was living at home on Cape Cod, and I would ride my bike a lot, and I would ride it to the beach, and I would climb up on the lifeguard chair, and I would sit there and stare out at the ocean. And I described how the ocean felt as vast and directionalist as my future. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I would sit there staring out at the waves, and I would look around at these homes that were boarded up in the off season. And that's how I felt. Like I was boarded up. My emotions were boarded up. So I used those descriptions of the setting to help tell my story, because it was perfect for how I felt. And can where you are help reflect your story? And again, we're going to go through these again, but these are some of the basics, because we're going to go into how to flesh out each of those bullets in the self-reflection. And then every edit, one edit will focus on the setting, and one edit will focus on all of these parts that we're going through. So your characters, right? I want you to think of people in your story, whether they're your friends or family, visualize them, close your eyes. What do you see? You know, not just how they looked, their hair color and their eyes, and maybe they had a lisp, or maybe, they, snapped when they talked or used their hands a lot, and also how they affected you. Did they influence you? Was it a big sister or brother and you just loved everything they said? Maybe it was someone you trusted and they, hurt you badly. So write down these list of characters that you're going to be describing and kind of flesh them out here, and you'll be able to use them in your story. You also want to add speculation. You can't remember everything maybe about your characters and their motivation. So using words like perhaps, or maybe she was, eating pizza for dinner because you remember that she ate pizza every night for dinner. And I know these are just generalizations, but use what you know and can remember to create a hypothesis about something about that person that's a mystery to you. Again, we're not making lies, but, we're adding speculation. We want to remember the dialogue. Again, all these little things are as you go through and edit. Sometimes you'll just focus on dialogue, sometimes just on setting. And again, it breaks down this big, daunting task into smaller, digestible parts. So dialogue, writing accurate dialogue. Of course, you can't remember everything that was said. Are you still on good terms with some of these people? Ask them if they have a memory of this conversation. Do you have old journals or letters? Again, when I started my book, I started by typing up every letter we wrote to each other. And this was the early 90s. We didn't really have email. We wrote a lot of letters. So I have these letters and these emotions and things we talked about. I have my journal entries. And again, I had nothing going on in my life. All I did was write in my journal. I got off the phone with Sarah. What did I write? What did we talk about? So I typed all this up, and that's how my book began. So I was able to create some of these stories into dialogue. And I know podcasts are so big now. Think of the podcasts, if you listen to them, there's one person talking sometimes, and they're okay podcasts. But if you have different voices, it gives more energy and excitement to some of these podcasts. And that's what dialogue will do to your story. Instead of saying, we were discussing where we wanted to go for our vacation, she said, hey, I've never been to the Bahamas, but remember last time you got a sunburn? I mean, whatever you want to say, but it just gives it a little 3-dimension to your story. So again, this is something you'll go through and add. And we want to create an emotional journey in our stories. We don't want it just to be flat. We want people to laugh. We want people to cry. We want people's jaws to drop. So when you reread through your story, why is this upsetting? Why do you feel deeply about it? And how can you resolve this feeling? You want to really connect your emotions as the protagonist with reflections and takeaway of what is happening. You want to also prepare for negative feedback, something I have to keep mentioning because it's there. And, memoir is liable of receiving negative feedback. And, you write a novel and people might have feedback and it's not so great. And, you don't take it maybe as personal. Yes, you wrote something you put your heart into, but when you write something memorable about your life and people have feedback that might not be so positive, it can be hard to hear what they say. Of all the feedback I get pretty much the most, not so negative, but just the ones that were maybe more critical or not as glowing were the people who were friends with Sarah, people who knew her, which was so surprising to me because I thought they would be the most supportive. But some of them felt like they were mad that Sarah hadn't told them about our affair. You know, one of the people who endorsed my book was Rita Mae Brown. I'm sure you've heard of her, Ruby Fruit Jungle. And we've gotten to be friends during this time. And she said to me, you know, Felice, people are going to read a book and they're going to read their book. They're going to think how it affected them or what it's about for them. And you have to remember that. People are going to give feedback of things based on their life experiences. You know, if people say to you, you don't know how to use commas, okay, I get it. That might take a little criticism, but you have to prepare for these kinds of things. But at the end of the day, you have to remind yourself you're writing this for you. You're not writing this for anyone else except yourself. And it's worth it. So what we want to say is you want to commit to finishing. You want to write something you can be proud of. And when you're ready to quit, and you'll probably feel like that more than once, you remind yourself of you why. You go back to the fridge, you read it. Why are you writing this? Because you have to tell your truth, because you want to love again, because you were, you know, somebody dared you to write it, whatever it is, write it. And, you know, if that doesn't work, I always say bribe yourself. And for me, ice cream works. So, you know, maybe that can work. So those are the basics of memoir. And those are kind of writing down the bones. Now we want to flesh it out. So how do we use this life writing to heal? So now we go back to that self-reflection list that we made. And we're constantly adding to it. And now we want to flesh it out. We want to start writing it down. And again, each one of these could become a chapter. So we're kind of creating this roadmap, remember? So we take one and pick whichever one you want to start with. You know, maybe you pick the first one that came to your mind, or the reason that you came to this workshop. Whatever it is, start with that. And there's different ways to flesh this out. Maybe you do it by journaling. You know, you just close your eyes and you type or you write stream of consciousness. Don't edit. Don't think about dialogue. Don't think about commas. Don't think about anything. Just write what happened. Get it out. Just get it out. That's all you have to do. Another way to get it out, and maybe if someone hurt you or there's something, you know, you ever have an experience with someone and you think later, I wish I had said this, maybe you write them a letter. It's not to write to them, but it's just what you would like to say to this person. You know, I have a book, a story in an anthology, which is a letter to Sarah, what I would like to have said to her now. And that was kind of, it just came out. But composing a letter like this, maybe you write a memoir of letters of people who've hurt you or people who've done things to you, or I'm just spitballing ideas. But again, just composing this letter could turn it into a chapter later, but it's just getting it out. It's that first wave of just getting it out. And another way of recollecting a story is possibly just making a list. Maybe, you know, it was raining. I was hungry. I hadn't eaten in 5 days. She was wearing a blue sweater, things that you start remembering. And it's okay to write them down like that. Again, we're not trying to edit. We don't want to avoid feelings that come up. You know, write it all down and get it all out. That's the first step. That's the hardest step. But knowing you don't have to worry about diction or grammar or commas or anything is helpful. So now we have a story done, you know, and again, it's not a big book. It's one story at a time. And we want to connect these events that happened to us then and how we feel about it now. You know, we can't change what happened, but we can notice how we're feeling about it. And this is the beginning of that reflection and that takeaway. As you reread that story, maybe you reread it just as how it's making you feel now. And you write down, you know, I was very young. I was naive. I had no clue. It was my first lover. It was the first time I tried this. Whatever it is, you write down these notes because this is going to be helpful for you in that reflection part. And the reflection part can come anywhere in your book. Perhaps it's coming during this memory of the story. Perhaps you don't want to take yourself out of the story and it comes at the end of the chapter. Perhaps it comes at the very end in the epilogue. Again, it's up to you, but writing it down now while it's fresh, while it's the first thing that comes to mind, is very helpful. Another way is to have a dialogue with yourself. This is, again, another part of the reflection, which is so critical. And you want to think of, the younger you speaking. I was 23. I didn't know better. And you now, 20 years, 10 years, 30 years later saying, it's okay. It's not your fault. And think of somebody who comes up to you, who's 20 or 25 or how old you were when something happened to you. And think of if they were telling this story to you that happened to them, how would you respond to them? Would you say, you were so dumb? Why would you fall for that? Or that's okay. That's part of growing up. That's part of becoming an adult. And that's what really helped me with seeing that it wasn't my fault, that it's okay. That's what our 20s are for, making stupid decisions or bad decisions or wrong decisions or right ones and learning from those. And now that I've looked back with so much experience, I'm okay with it. I'm not still ashamed. I realize that's part of healing. That's okay. And you want to write a balanced emotional narrative. Everything just can't be negative, negative, negative. I only got D's in school. Nobody liked me. Nobody wants to read that. You're writing about deep emotions, and you want to write about happy things that happen to you, because even in the moment, like when Sarah was dying, I found ways to possibly laugh or smile. Not that I was dismissing this incredible experience I was having, but it's because that's how we deal with things. Have you ever been to a funeral and something funny happens? It's not on purpose, but it's a way of releasing some of that angst. And for me, it's so important, to feel both ways, because you can't just feel sad. Sometimes you cry and laugh at the same time. And if you really can't find anything, not so much humorous, but positive, give yourself gratitude for writing about something that's very hard. Pat yourself on the back. You're doing something that's not easy. This is not easy what you're doing. And again, the goal isn't to re-traumatize yourself, and I'll speak about that soon, but it's just to get over something so that you can learn to be happy again. Here's something about revising past events. Now, you can't go back and change the past, but you can in your story. Now, it's not necessarily going to be in your memoir, right? Because we're talking about things that happened, but you can write a different outcome. And maybe you write something that happened differently, and it's not for the memoir, but it's for you to see things having a different result, for you having a better ending. And it can also help in case you find yourself in this predicament again. Oh, I know how to get through this because I wrote a different ending. So, maybe something you would have preferred. I have a client, I work one-on-one with people, helping them craft their memoirs. And she's a young woman whose husband left her for his brother's wife. And it was very traumatic and it was very hard. And it took her a long time. And she's been writing about it, and it hasn't been easy. And I said, why don't you write a different outcome? And now she actually has a girlfriend. Just so happened. She's very happy. And maybe if that hadn't happened, if her husband hadn't cheated on her and left her, she would have discovered another side of her, one that makes her feel so much better. So, write something different. You can't change it. So that's been helpful for her. And she, instead of her husband leaving, had her husband staying, and she didn't like that. She found it better that he left. So one thing we want to do is write in detail. Now, your reflection part is more vague, but in your actual story, the more specifics, the better. Even if readers have never had that experience, maybe someone's at home and somebody's banging on the door and the door opens and these heavy footsteps come in. Well, maybe that's never happened to you, but that's putting you in the moment. That's making you feel scared and what's going to happen. So it's these little details that you can add. And again, every edit through, you're focusing on something different. one focused dialogue, one on detail, one on setting as you go through. And again, this can happen over and over. In my book, 750 edits, if not more, I did. And it's the beauty of this, it's just over and over until you feel you can read through it and get a picture, and your other readers will see a picture and get that feedback, but it's for you to do this. Again, we want to create order and organization, my favorite words. Sometimes these traumatic experiences can leave us with a fragmented narrative that is missing and overemphasizing others. We remember this person that hurt us was 6 feet tall and had muscles and blah, blah, blah. And as you start to write it down, you realize they were your height. And it wasn't a thunder and lightning storm, or it wasn't in the middle of a hurricane. It was actually a nice day. And as you start to kind of create your story and slowly break the story down, you realize that maybe it wasn't so scary, or that you're able to give it perspective and see that it wasn't as bad, or seeing it on paper, you see that it was traumatic, but you're able to have this distance from it, being able to organize your thoughts. Well, you know what, right before this happened, we had a lovely dinner, or for the first time ever, I was able to ride my bike, or something that you can give these beautiful moments to something horrible. And there's a story in my grandfather's book where he gets to Bergen-Belsen and he knows what's happening and he's scared and he knows that people are dying here. And all of a sudden, right at this moment, he sees a girl from his hometown and he runs up to her and she tells him he has 2 sisters here. So in this moment of fear that this is the end, he has this positive, exciting, hopeful moment. And that's what you're trying to do as when you're able to kind of step outside. And speaking of step outside, when you write something down, we set it outside ourselves. And, you write something down, again, that feeling of writing or typing, you're creating distance between yourself. It could be about reading about somebody totally different. You could think that I'm reading the story. It didn't happen to me. In a lot of my talks, I talk about how my dad was one of my first editors and edited a lot of my sex scenes, whether with women or men. And people say, how could you do that? Oh my God. And I thought, that 23-year-old me is no longer me. It's another person. And I was able to create this distance. And it's also why I put in some humor, because I knew he was reading it. But, another trick is maybe writing the story using she or he or they or them instead of I, as though this story happened to someone else. And it can allow you to write no longer as a victim, but as a witness, as this story happened to someone. Wow, look at what happened to them. And they survived. Here they are writing about it. The aim here is not to re-traumatize yourself again. It's to get past something. And again, maybe you're not writing this to be published. You're just writing it to heal, to get better, to see that this should no longer haunt you. And it might take a while. You want to be open. In this story, having different perspectives allow you to see that maybe this person or these people or something, it wasn't intentionally to hurt you. This story with my client whose husband left her for his brother's wife, I had her write a chapter from everybody else's perspective, not to, say that it was okay what they did, not to excuse their behaviors, but to possibly think of where they were coming from. Why did her husband cheat on her? It wasn't because she was a jerk or did this or that. He was coming from somewhere else. And why, and how did her brother-in-law feel? And why did her sister-in-law, who she was best friends with, cheat on her? And just understanding these perspectives allowed her to go through the pain and to let go of some of that anger and to not be so mad that they were doing something to her, but it was something about their lives that they had to do. And she was able to kind of move past that. And then she met this woman and realized that she loves women. And for whatever reason, these were things that helped her. Again, you want to be compassionate and kind. Like I said, if it was not a younger you, but it was another person who came up to you, a coworker, a girlfriend, a cousin, a niece, anyone who came up to you or older who was telling you what they were going through, how would you respond? Would you say, again, how did you let that happen to you? Or would you say, I'm sorry this happened to you? Would you give them a hug? Would you want to say, you survived this? You want to try to withhold self-criticism and, saying criticism about your writing. There'll be enough, outside people to possibly do that. But, there were many times when I was writing half in and I thought, who's going to want to read this? Maybe this isn't good enough. And now it's been endorsed by all these people and it's won awards. And I think, wow, I've had librarians tell me they couldn't put it down. And I thought, wow. But when you're in the middle of it, it can be hard to believe in yourself. You have the self-talk, and try to change that self-talk to positive, because like Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. So just try to be compassionate and gentle. And we're confronting our fears in this. We are talking about something that is scary. Again, we're not trying to re-traumatize ourselves, but to heal. And for those of you, I can't see your faces, but if you've ever heard of Free to Be You and Me, they had this song, crying lets the hurt out of you. It gets rid of pain. Like sweating gets rid of these toxins. Crying can help you get rid of the pain, and writing it down can help you get rid of the pain and to work through it, because it's the only way you can heal. If you break your arm and you have to exercise, you have to push through that pain to get to the healing part. There are so many analogies, but if you feel unsafe, stop. The goal again is not to hurt or re-traumatize, but ask yourself, why do you feel hurt, and what you're going to do if you do feel sadness or fear. Have a plan in place. Will you talk to someone? Will you go for a walk? Will you take a deep breath? Will you make yourself a chai latte? If that helps, whatever helps, call a friend. But at the end of the day, again, remind yourself you're doing this to heal, not to scare yourself again. And again, slow down while you're doing this. As you start to write about something, you might feel how your body's responding. There were many times I could feel my nose tingling. I could feel the sadness coming, the tears coming, and I would just work through it. And sometimes I just had to close my eyes and slow down. Sometimes I had to stop. Sometimes I had to just push through it and write. And maybe you need to do speech to text. Maybe it's easier to speak it, and that's okay. However you can to get your story through. Maybe you sit down with someone and have a conversation and tell them and record it. However you need to do it. But again, when you feel that pain, why are you feeling that pain as well? What's coming up for you? That's part of the reflection as well. Listen to your body. And again, take a break if you have to. Again, it's not here to hurt you or re-traumatize you. And maybe you need to write in short increments. You write for 15 minutes or 30 minutes or set a timer. For me, whenever I sit down to write, whatever it is, I shut off my phone of notifications and I set the timer for 45 minutes. That works for me because it's very hard to get in the seat. It takes a lot of self-control. And once you're in the seat, you don't want anything to stop you. So for me, I write for 45 minutes. If I'm in the groove, if I'm in the zone, I reset the timer, I keep going. If I need to stop, I stop. I take some time, I do what I need to do. You get a drink, you go for a walk, you do some push-ups, whatever works for you. Then when you're ready, you reset the timer and sit down. And it can get me in the seat. It just works. Maybe you make sure to do this 4 times a day or once a day or whatever to get you started. It really can just push you when you can't push yourself. And maybe you need to take a week off from writing. You need to recharge, whatever it is you need to do. This is how you do it. And lastly, it's a journey, right? You're going to remember things. You're going back in time. It's self-discovery. It's about healing, and you're learning about yourself. So many times when we go through trauma or something that hurt us, we forget about it. We put it in the back of our mind. It's how we survive. I write about my grandmother, who I'm named after. She was in Auschwitz. How did she survive that? She would say she had to put the trauma way in the back of her mind. She couldn't deal with what she was seeing. She had to get through it. And hopefully you'll never have anything in your life as horrific, but your hurt is still relevant. And you want the goal is to be happy and healthy. While you wrote that as your why or not, that is the goal. It's to enjoy life, enjoying the passage of time that's enjoying life. It's enjoying this journey, and know that at the beginning, it's not going to be so easy, but it's going to be worth it. And it's going to be hard, but it's going to be healing. And nothing worth doing is without some challenge, because you feel better. You ever hike a scary hike and you get to the top and you were so scared? And how do you feel when you get to the top? How do you feel when you've run a marathon? When you've done whatever, fill in the blank, you've done it. It's not easy. If this was easy, everybody would do it. So, embrace that journey and where it could take you. And there are some great books on why we write memoir, why we write about ourselves. This is, memoirists talking about why they've had to tell their stories. You just couldn't. I had to tell my story. I just couldn't live any longer with the secret, with shame. You want to help other people. Everybody has a different story. The autobiographer's handbook, again, great people telling these great stories of why they had to write. Why did you have to write? Why did you want to tell your story? Writing to Save Your Life. This is a fabulous book. And, there's all these different prompts and writing ideas to help you go through, and a lot of which I borrowed because they're helpful, to keep you going. Once you've gotten started, you want to have those steps to keep you going and that reward at the end. So, these are my books, and I want to go through now all these questions and the things in the chat. Like I mentioned, I also work with people who want to start crafting their stories. I'm working with a woman who is writing about being in the Navy and things that had happened to her. She had been raped. She was there with tailhook. People told her she could never be this. She could never do this. And all these parts of her life she was able to overcome and prove them wrong. And how we craft the memoir, and how, you find these painful things, you find your theme, because it could change again, but sometimes you might not be able to see it. Okay. Understand marketing a fictional romance. How do you market a memoir? Great question. It's a challenge, for me, because my memoir reads like a novel. I can do that, but it's also about, finding outlets, talking about your memoir, finding meetup groups that read memoir, finding people that are interested in memoir, offering to do talks at libraries. There are people who are interested in memoir, and finding those niches, finding those people who are interested, offering to talk about how you wrote your book. People are interested in it, and find niches from your memoir. Was your memoir about how you knitted Afghans for hundreds of kids? Well, maybe you go to a sewing group. Maybe you find little things that find connections. One connection is your hometown. You start with you start with the people who know you. There are different ways to market. And there's, you can also market it the same way as fiction, finding people who might be interested, or, you can do ads. You can do ads on Amazon or Facebook, or, Facebook. There are groups of people who are interested in memoir, or interested in whatever it is you're talking about, people who've kept secrets. What about writing a memoir when one or more of the characters are still alive? Good question, Joni. That's a slippery slope. The woman I wrote about, Sarah, she had passed away, and she always said I could write about her. But, unless you're writing about something and you're really maligning that person, you can write about someone. You can change their description. You can change their name. You can ask them if they're okay with you writing about them, but you can change them in little ways to protect them. But unless you've really like said, they stole $50,000 from this bank in September 1997, and you give their name, then, you're okay to write about them. You have to be careful, and you could talk to a lawyer if you need, but, you can just change the characters. Okay, I've always struggled with being fully truthful when so many of my truths involve others, particularly family who are still alive. How do you straddle that line without compromise? I think you need to also look at what these people did to you. Was it specifically because it was your mother, and that's the person we're supposed to trust the most? Or is it something that it was what they did to you that you can change that a little, or it was done to you? Some people don't care. I'm reading now Samantha Irby's latest book, and she just writes about, she just puts it all out there. She doesn't care. As long as you're, again, not, saying something really bad about this person, they can't sue you. They could be pissed. They could be mad at you. And maybe you need to tell them you're doing this for your truth. And again, maybe you're not doing this to be published. Maybe you're just doing it for you, and then you can write it. Or you just need to tell your truth any way you can. Put that story out there. Again, you can try talking with them. You could talk to a lawyer, but what is it that is compelling you to tell this story? Is it because you feel hurt and you want to get through it? There are ways to tell the story without so much putting the blame on the person, or without, putting them down. You could say, look, maybe they were traumatized as a kid and it's not 100% their fault. I'm learning we're all human. Okay, so that's a similar question. How would a memoir read like a novel if it contains a decent amount of reflection? I didn't think novels were very retrospective, so I'm confused by that. Good question. I mean, in writing the story, how I wrote it like a novel, in that the way the story flows. It wasn't about, in my childhood, I did this. I was just in the story. So it's almost that I'm telling you the story, but I wrote it as though it were less memoirish, in that I was just telling the story and about what was happening is almost real time. That if you read a couple, chapters from my book, it could read as though it was a character in a book. It wasn't necessarily, just a memoir. It was talking about whatever. It could be a novel. People say that they just read it as though, you forget that this was a real person. And that's kind of how I meant that. So it can be difficult to, without feeling self-indulgent, even if your goal is to connect with others who may have struggled with the same issues. How do you get past that embargo on making the memoir story too much about me instead of all about the me's out there? Well, people always say, I don't want to write a memoir. It's all about navel gazing and it's about me and it's self-indulgent. It's not. We're writing about something that happened to you. If I were just writing about, hey, you know what, then I was in high school and I made the all-star team and then I went to college and I played Division I and blah. Nobody wants to read that. That's not the point of a memoir. Of what we're talking about is something that you experienced, that you went through, and can what you're talking about help you? Can it help somebody else? And that's really the goal of writing this memoir. And yes, it's about you, but so many people, like I said, will read this book and see themselves in it. And you want to write with the hope of your story helping someone else. How can it help someone else? And that's your goal. So your 5 years of therapy is about me. Writing a book for publication is about helping others. Yes, it's also about helping yourself. For me, writing the book for years and years was to help me. It was to help me get over it. And I found that just by writing, it wasn't enough. I had to tell my story because I had to let go of that shame. And I had to put it out there. And did I think it would help others? I guess I hoped it would. The feedback I continue to get makes me feel like what I did it for a reason. That if I could help one person, it made me feel so great, because what have you learned in therapy? There are scenes in my book with me and the therapist, getting through that and how I learned from that and how it can possibly help others. I see that there's a lot in the chat and there's no more questions. So let me is there anything in the chat? Okay. Anything? Thank you. If you need to send me an email, if you have specific questions after, you're welcome to. You can email me. My website's felicecohen.com. My email's felice@felicecohen.com. I'm going to be in Denver. If anybody's going to be there, I'm on a panel. I'm doing a reading. I'm excited. This has been so much fun meeting so many people. How accurately did your story survive editing? That's a good one. Well, I remember at one point, my book was about 140,000 words, and my editor said, that's twice as many words as you can have. And I thought, what? I have to get rid of half of these words? But, I'm an organizer. I am a minimalist. I am good at decluttering. And I looked at the book like, okay, I took out a red pen and I literally printed it out and I said, went back to my why and my what declarative statement and what is the book about? And as I read through, I said, is this really needed? Is this needed? Is this about the theme? Is this going to help? Is this just BS? Do I need this? And I was able to little by little. Did it all come out in the first edit? No. The second edit? No. The 57th edit? Maybe by then they started to clean it more and more. And every time I would go through, I would redo the word count. I'm doing that now. My next book is so long and I'm chopping it down because it's all letters. I have found every letter I've ever been given from family, from friends, from exes since I was a little kid. Every single letter I've always received, and now I'm editing it down. And at first I thought it was going to be this reverse memoir, but it's actually this incredible story of all these other people. Literally 1,000 letters I'm condensing. So every time I go through, I'm condensing. What can I take out? What can I get rid of? Is that related? And it takes a long time to go through, get rid of a little more and a little more. And again, it's an ongoing process and it's a healing process. And it's worth it. And it's so much fun. And to me, it's like a game. When I do somebody's closet, I love it. People think I'm nuts, but it's like, how do I make this better? And I think about that with my writing. How can I make this better? And that's the beauty of memoir. It's creative. It's your own story. And I want you to be able to feel free to tell your story. And again, they say dance like no one is watching. Don't worry about anybody else on your first go through. Get it out, write it all down. We all have stories to share. We're all unique. And even if some twins grow up kind of with the same life, they're going to have different perspectives. So think about that. And don't think of it as, navel gazing or anything like that. It's your story. And even if you only help yourself, you've helped somebody. So anything else? I don't see any more questions. So this has been great. I love doing this. I'm happy. Again, if you're interested in helping me help you craft your memoir, I'd be more than happy to do that. It's fun. You've got a story to tell. Think of what your story is. If you're going to be in Denver, please come up and say hi. This was great. It's hard to talk and not see your beautiful faces. So I do hope to meet you in the next couple of weeks and months. So thank you so much. Happy Pride. I'll be in DC tomorrow. If anybody is going to be at the festival, I would love to see you at the Sapphic Lit pop-up. So stay safe and I appreciate it. Thank you. Take care.